Good evening. I held out my hand. My voice was pitched low, a steady anchor against the hum of the string quartet playing in the corner of the Meridian Grand Ballroom. My wife, Emma, turned toward me. For one fraction of a second, the severe lines of her face softened. Her eyes lit up, and a warm, brilliant smile broke across her lips. I exhaled. The knot of anxiety in my chest loosened. She was stressed, sure, but she was still my wife. She was still the woman I loved. Then she stepped right past me. She wasn't smiling at me. She was smiling at a waiter carrying a silver tray of champagne. She took a glass, took a sip, and finally allowed her eyes to drop to my outstretched hand. The warmth vanished. Her lip curled in genuine visceral disgust. "Get your hand away from me," she hissed, her voice slicing through the polite murmurs of the nearby executives. "Emma, it's me. Don't touch me." She leaned in, the floral perfume I'd bought her for our anniversary suddenly smelling toxic. "I can smell the failure on you from here. Whatever miserable lower-class hole you crawled out of, crawl back." "I belong here tonight. Belong." She let out a sharp, practiced laugh designed to draw an audience. "Look at your suit. Look at this room. You're a peasant. You're nothing here. Security, get this man out before he embarrasses me." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "I have every right to stand here. You have no rights in this room," she snapped, her eyes dead and cold. "No name. Nobody here even sees you." 300 guests were watching us now. Cell phones subtly rose in the dim light. Someone snickered behind a crystal glass. I slowly lowered my hand. I let the silence hang. I didn't leave. Will she really push this until it shatters?
What Emma didn't know, what nobody in that glittering ballroom knew, was exactly who they were laughing at. They saw a man in a cheap charcoal suit. They didn't see the man who quietly owned 62% of Sterling Apex Industries. I was the apex predator in this room, and I was going to let her dig her own grave. I retreated toward the edge of the ballroom, blending into the shadows. I watched Emma laugh with her inner circle, trying to reconcile the monster in the silver gown with the woman I had married. I didn't inherit my wealth. I built it from the wreckage of failing companies. Emma knew about my poverty-stricken past, but she thought it was my present. When she was hired as managing director of Sterling Apex through a blind trust she never traced back to me, I chose to stay hidden. I needed to see how she led when she thought she answered to no one. When the rumors of corporate corruption first reached me, I didn't want to believe it. I audited her department, fully expecting to find simple administrative errors. I wanted her to be innocent. I wanted to be wrong. I almost was. The initial files looked clean. The budgets were tight but legally sound. I actually smiled, closing my laptop in my home office, relieved that my wife was the honest leader I believed her to be. Then I opened the termination file of Renee Castillo. Renee was an 11-year veteran of the company, a single mother, the kind of employee who still believed the corporate handbook actually meant something. While auditing the Ohio facility's warehouse records, Renee found the glaring discrepancies in the equipment safety logs. She compiled a meticulous report and walked it directly into Emma's office. Emma didn't fix the problem. She fired Renee. I remembered sitting in my home study at midnight, the house dead quiet. The yellow glow of my desk lamp spilled over the paperwork. My coffee had gone ice cold. Budget cuts, the file claimed. It was a lie. Emma had fired the only honest person left in the building to protect her own executive bonus. Over the next 18 months, 2 more whistleblowers vanished the exact same way. Meanwhile, a worker at the Ohio facility broke his hand on the exact piece of machinery Emma had falsely marked as inspected. I quietly paid his medical bills through an anonymous trust. I looked across the ballroom. Emma was toasting her success. Tonight, the bill comes due.
I moved toward the balcony to clear my head, but by 9 o'clock I wasn't alone. A heavy-set security guard in his mid-30s was tracking me. When I walked to the buffet, he shadowed me. When I stepped toward the north windows, he mirrored my movement. He stayed exactly 30 feet back, his earpiece glowing faintly. Emma had flagged me as a threat. I slipped through a set of heavy velvet curtains and stepped out onto the stone terrace, effectively losing the guard in the maze of caterers. The cool night air hit my face. I gripped the stone balustrade, staring out at the city lights. A sick sense of doubt crept into my chest. If I dropped the hammer tonight, I wasn't just destroying my marriage. I was risking a $300 million company that employed thousands of innocent people. The SEC would circle like vultures. The stock would plummet. Thousands of families like Renee Castillo's could lose their livelihoods in the fallout. Was I really willing to gamble an entire corporation just to enact revenge on my wife? The terrace door clicked open. Emma stepped out into the moonlight. The cruel, practiced mask she wore in the ballroom was gone. She looked pale, exhausted. Her shoulders slumped as she leaned against the brick wall. "Carlos," she whispered. Her voice trembled. I turned around. My anger wavered. "I shouldn't have snapped at you in there," she said, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "The pressure tonight is it's suffocating. The board is watching my every move. The quarterly numbers are tighter than I admitted. I'm terrified." My heart skipped a beat. I thought, this is it. The armor was coming off. She was stressed, backed into a corporate corner, playing a dangerous game. If she asked my help right now, if she leaned on me as her husband, I could fix it. I could quietly bail out the budget. I could save her. I took a step toward her. "Talk to me," I said softly. "Whatever it is, we can handle it." She looked up at me, her eyes shimmering. For 3 seconds, she was my wife again. I reached out to hold her. She dodged my hand. She reached into her silver sequined clutch, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and shoved it hard against my chest.
"Take a cab home," she hissed, her voice dropping back into that icy, transactional tone. "Willard is asking questions. Derp thinks you're a caterer. I am trying to lock down a massive bonus tonight, and your presence here is a liability. Take the money, go out through the service elevator, and do not make a scene." The illusion shattered instantly. The $100 bill fluttered to the terrace stones, landing in a puddle of spilled wine. She wasn't apologizing. She was managing me. "I'm a liability?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly flat. "You're an embarrassment," she corrected sharply, stepping back into the light of the ballroom. "Don't make me have security drag you out through the kitchens." She turned and disappeared back into the Gala. I stared at the wet money on the ground. The hesitation I had felt evaporated. I walked back into the ballroom. I had made my decision. I was going to leave. Not because she told me to, but because confronting her on stage wasn't worth the collateral damage. I would contact my lawyers in the morning. I would file for divorce quietly. I would fire her through the board on Monday. No dramatics, no viral videos. The audience thought the explosion was coming, but I was going to walk away. I turned toward the coat check. I exhaled, the tension finally leaving my shoulders. It was over. Then, a heavy hand clamped onto my collar. I was violently yanked backward into a velvet-lined alcove, out of sight of the main floor. Dirk Hinrichs, the finance chief, slammed me against the wall. His aristocratic face was tight with panic, his breath reeking of top-shelf gin.
"What the hell do you think you're doing, Scott?" Dirk hissed. "Enjoying my wife's gala, Dirk," I replied, my voice dangerously low. I grabbed his wrist. "Take your hand off me." Dirk didn't let go. He leaned in closer, his eyes wild. "I know you were in her home office last week. I saw the Ring camera logs. You've been digging through her briefcase." My blood ran cold. I hadn't covered my tracks perfectly. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said evenly. "Don't play stupid with me, you pathetic leech," Dirk sneered. "You found the Ohio warehouse safety logs, didn't you? You saw the discrepancies. You think because you're sleeping with the boss you can blackmail us? What do you want? A payout to keep your mouth shut?" He thought I was a gold-digging husband trying to extort my own wife's company. He had no idea he was threatening the man who signed his paychecks. But his threat changed everything. If Dirk knew I was onto them, he would shred the paper trails tonight. He would wipe the servers before my auditors arrived on Monday. The evidence I needed to legally terminate them without tanking the stock price would be gone by sunrise. I can't walk away. I have to drop the hammer right now. "I don't want your money, Dirk," I said. I ripped his hand off my lapel with enough force to make him stumble back. "If you breathe a word about those logs," Dirk threatened, straightening his cuffs, "I will have Emma bury you in legal fees until you're sleeping in that rusty car of yours again. Walk away." Dirk stormed back into the ballroom. I stood in the alcove, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket. I opened a direct line to Ann Johnson, the corporate MC waiting behind the stage curtains. I typed out the message, "We are a go, 9:30 p.m. sharp." I pressed send. The die was cast. At 9:15, the house lights dimmed. Emma took the stage, adjusting the microphone as the spotlight caught the silver sequins of her gown. She looked radiant, untouchable. "Good evening, Sterling Apex family," she began, her voice smooth as poured glass. "Tonight, we celebrate excellence. We celebrate the standard of perfection." Polite applause rippled through the room. I stood in the absolute back, leaning against a marble pillar, watching my wife lie to 700 people. 3 years ago, I inherited a company in decline, Emma continued, her chin lifting. It was inefficient, undisciplined, full of people who confused blind loyalty with actual performance. I made the hard choices. I trimmed what didn't serve us. I built a culture of winners, not excuses. My thumb hovered over a secondary kill switch command on my phone. If I pressed it, the reveal would be canceled. As I watched her, a sliver of doubt returned. She was a brilliant speaker. She had the crowd in the palm of her hand. Maybe I could just suspend her, handle this internally. Then Emma's eyes scanned the crowd. She found me in the shadows. "Some people," she said, her voice dropping into a register of pure, icy contempt, "do not belong in rooms like this, and they need to be reminded of that fact, gently when possible, firmly when necessary." Laughter echoed around me. Willard Hodge raised his glass to her. Dirk grinned at me from the front row. She was using me as a punchline. She was executing my dignity to impress the very executive she was defrauding. I put my phone in my pocket. I didn't press the kill switch. "To standards that never bend," Emma yelled, raising her crystal glass high. "To the future of Sterling Apex." Before the crowd could echo her, the massive crystal chandeliers above the stage violently snapped off. The room plunged into sudden, shocking darkness. A murmur of confusion rippled through the guests. Emma's triumphant smile fractured. "What is this? This isn't on the schedule. Garrett, get the lights." From the shadows, Ann Johnson stepped into a single blinding white spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ann's voice boomed, "before we close tonight's program, I have an announcement that has been 3 years in the making." Emma stood frozen. "Ann, stop speaking. What are you doing?" 3 years ago, Sterling Apex Industries was quietly restructured under new majority ownership, Ann announced. Tonight, for the first time, that owner has asked to be introduced to the company he has led from behind the scenes. A shockwave of panicked whispers hit the room. "Please join me in recognizing the man behind Sterling Apex," Ann commanded. "A man many of you met tonight without realizing exactly who he was." The massive 60-foot LED screen flared to life. It was my face. A 12-foot-tall corporate portrait of me sitting behind a mahogany desk in the penthouse suite. Beneath my face, the bold white text read, "Carlos Scott, 62% majority owner and chairman." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating terror. Her crystal wine glass slipped from her hand. It shattered against the stage floor. The sound cracked through the silent room like a gunshot. All the color drained from Emma's face. Her mouth fell open. Down in the front row, Dirk Hinrichs stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face so fast I thought he was going to pass out. He realized the man he had just threatened to bury in legal fees owned the entire firm. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked directly down the center aisle. 700 elites parted for me like the Red Sea. I climbed the stairs to the stage. "Carlos," Emma whispered, her voice a broken gasp. You own this whole time?" 3 years, I said. I took the microphone. "I spent 3 years watching exactly who you were, Emma, when you thought no one who mattered was paying attention." "I didn't know," she begged, tears spilling over her mascara. "Carlos, please, if I had known who you were." "That is exactly the problem," I barked, my voice cracking like thunder. I slammed a heavy manila folder onto the podium. "I have the documentation, the falsified safety inspections, the retaliatory termination records, the stolen budget reports that funded your bonuses." "Wait!" shouted Dirk from the front row, throwing his hands up in a desperate panic. "Carlos, wait! She forced me to do it. Emma signed off on it all. I just followed orders." The crowd gasped. The executives were already cannibalizing each other. Emma whipped her head toward Dirk, her face twisting in pure rage. "You lying snake! You manipulated the numbers, Dirk! I didn't know half of what you were doing!" I watched them tear each other to pieces. The mirage of their loyalty was completely shattered. "Effective immediately," I said into the microphone, my voice cutting through their screaming match. "Emma Scott, Willard Hodge, and Dirk Hinrichs are relieved of their duties pending a full federal audit and criminal investigation." Emma's knees buckled. She collapsed against the podium, sobbing. Willard was already sprinting toward the exit. I set the microphone down. I walked off the stage and walked out into the cool night air. Her empire was dust. By morning, the cell phone footage had gone aggressively viral. GalaGate was the #1 trending topic globally. The board didn't hesitate. Willard became radioactive in the industry.
Dirk's signature was on too many forged documents, and a federal indictment was handed down within a month. Emma lost everything. 4 days after the gala, a massive thunderstorm rolled through the city. I was sitting in my living room, watching the rain lash against the windows, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Emma standing on the porch. She was soaked to the bone. Her hair was plastered to her face, and her eyes were swollen and red. Stripped of her gowns and titles, she looked completely broken. "Carlos, please," she sobbed, reaching out for the doorframe. "Please let me explain. I'll do anything." I stared at her. The anger had burned out of me, leaving only a profound, heavy sadness. I remembered our wedding day. I remembered the woman who used to stay up late with me, drinking cheap coffee and talking about the future. I felt a dangerous surge of pity. I reached out, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I was going to let her inside. I was going to offer her a lifeline.
"We can beat this, Carlos," she whispered, her eyes suddenly sharpening with a frantic, calculating light. "If we stay married, we have spousal privilege. The feds can't force me to testify against Dirk if you fund my legal team. We can pin the entire fraud on him. I can save my reputation, and you keep the company's stock from dropping. It's a win-win." My hand froze on the doorknob. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't seeking redemption. She was networking. She was looking for a legal loophole to avoid prison time, and I was just the most convenient tool available to her. The last shred of the woman I loved vanished into the storm. "You had 3 years, Emma," I said softly, my voice devoid of emotion. "You had 3 years to show me you had a heart. You showed me exactly what you are." "I love you," she cried out, sensing she had miscalculated. "Doesn't that matter?" It mattered. Past tense. I slowly closed the heavy oak door. I engaged the deadbolt. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. She didn't fight it. The first thing I did as public CEO was call Renee Castillo. I reinstated her with full back pay and promoted her to Director of Corporate Compliance. She cried on the phone when I called her. A year later, I still wear off-the-rack suits. I still keep a low profile. But I learned a lesson I will pass down until the day I die. True character isn't what a person does when the cameras are flashing. Character is how they treat you when they think you are invisible. Some hands are extended to greet you, and some hands are extended to test you. Choose carefully whose hand you refuse to shake.